Good morning, everybody. Romulo Vega, accompanied by Brother Chato here. We're going to today discuss a very important topic, a topic that is prevalent in all our lives, but more often than not, depending on your community, where you come from, maybe you don't properly acknowledge this topic in your day-to-day life. So as I said, I'm Romulo Vega, one half of the Two Vatos segment that we're doing here. And I want to say, Brother Chato, good morning to you. How are you feeling today?
Hey, good morning. It's always good on a Sunday, feeling a little bit relaxed to be able to have these conversations with you, man. It's always a pleasure. I really, really enjoy these, and I'm glad to be here. So, good morning.
Excellent. So we're going to today discuss the topic of mental health and how that affects our communities. In particular, kind of the masculinity element. At least that's what I'm going to be listening and learning throughout this conversation. And we want to welcome our guest to today's plática. Please welcome Miguel Estevez from the Grand Island area, a mental health professional. Good morning, Miguel. How are you doing today?
Buenos dias. How's everybody doing?
Good, good. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And as I said in the intro, this topic of mental health is one that, at least in my upbringing, we don't really talk about. We just kind of go about our business, and we kind of bury things, hold it in until, things start to feel like they just want to explode sometimes, So that's kind of what I bring to this conversation. And I'd love to hear from each one of you kind of what your experiences or your thoughts on the subject of mental health in your upbringing, your community, and why both of you have chosen to focus on mental health as your profession. Whoever wants to go first.
Hey, go ahead, Miguel, as our guest today.
Yeah, so my name is Miguel Estevez. I am half Guatemalan, half Salvadoran. The reason I say that because it's really important to my journey on mental health, just because both cultures are so different, even though they're Spanish speaking, similar border countries and stuff. But for me, like I've just have a lot of childhood trauma, and so that has caused me to cope in inappropriate ways. From alcohol to dating or putting my identity in certain things. And so, and then myself having at some point anxiety and depression, and having to work through that, which ultimately led me to become a mental health therapist and a drug and alcohol therapist. And so, so I think that's what led me, because of my own story and my own personal story, even the trauma about my own family that they have. And I think that's what I think it got me really interested in what therapy looked like. And I started to ask the questions of why does our community, specifically the Latino community or Latina community, why do we respond in certain ways of certain things? And so some of the questions I ask, and some of the questions I'm still asking now that I've been a therapist for a little bit over a year. Obviously, it's been an interesting first year to be a therapist during COVID, which I've had to do therapy with some of the workers that lost, family members or had someone that had COVID. So even how depression, anxiety kind of puts in play during this time, and even unlock some of our PTSD that we have. And I'll talk a little bit about intergenerational trauma later, but that's kind of my original intro of why I think mental health is very important.
Cool. Because, very similar. I think that is our personal experiences, our history is what a lot of times guides us to go into the field of helping, right? Community-based, providing services to community. Very similar with Miguel, my life experiences growing up. And growing up, I grew up in South Omaha, and what we see is that there's a lot of what's the word? We're not aware. We're not aware of trauma. We're not aware, even that word, like even trying to explain that word trauma, and how do we explain that to our communities? Sometimes it's really difficult. It took me many years to be able to try to really, really try to explain it outside of a textbook definition. especially translating it into Spanish or communities that don't even speak, that have their own native language. So, I think for me, that question that came up very often was why. I always tell a story, and I won't tell it today, but there's a story of the first time that I kind of got into trouble, and my mom had to go to school, and I was in elementary school, and it was the first time I had smoked weed. And I was thinking that my mom was going to come in and be the disciplinary, so I was scared as a little kid. And the police were there, the principal's there. And as my mom comes through the principal's office, walking all the way up to the school because she didn't drive, she comes in and she's crying, but to the point where she couldn't breathe and in between sobs, right? What she said was, "Why, mijo? Why? Why did you do it?" And so then that question would arise for the next following years. Why, mijo? Why, mijo? And everybody would ask that question at school, the counselors, the teachers, my parents. Why? And so, it took many, many, many years until I became an adult. And I was living in California, and I was surrounded by men that were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, men that were clinical social workers, men that started to provide guidance that helped me to begin to understand that not only within my family, but within my community, there was, many, many things that have happened that had caused these behaviors, these feelings, these emotions to be present. And Miguel touched upon something. There was a word there that he threw out, which was generational, right? So then I began to understand why, answering that question, why. And that sort of is what led me to become a mental health therapist, because I had these men, that were mentors that had started their healing process, right? So that really pushed me to get involved, within community. And I'll say, being a therapist, I've been a therapist for about, I don't know, 5 years now. But, in our communities and in our culture, we never had therapists, right? There was never therapists, but we had people that would help within the community. I'm talking about hundreds of years ago. So within our cultures, oftentimes this mental health therapy, it's a foreign concept. For me, I've been working in community for about 13 years now. So I wasn't doing therapy, but I was doing healing work. I was doing helping families and children within the process of healing. So within that aspect, it's been about 13 years in the capacities of South Omaha, East San Jose, working in schools, working in intervention specialist, behavioral specialist. So there was a lot of different roles, crisis intervention. And then eventually I wanted to do some one-on-one work and be a mental health therapist. And so now I'm a trauma therapist, and I work mostly with children and families that have been affected by sexual abuse and physical abuse, and I work for a child resource center. And so, yeah, and I get people, the kids that I work with sometimes have had a missing persons report made on them. So we're trying to prevent child trafficking. And so that's kind of the role that I play now. There's not a lot of Spanish speaking therapists, and let alone male Spanish speaking therapists. Yep. So that's kind of where I'm at in my trajectory and what I do, just to kind of give you an outline.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And me being the non-mental health professional here, I'm very interested because I'm relating to what you're saying in some of the aspects there. The lack of familiarity, lack of comfort with the topic of mental health. How do you bring that up? How do you talk about that? What a lot of what's running through my mind is with regards to identity. Being a man, in my case, a heterosexual male, and now at 35 years old, my identity and who I want to be going forward, but also understanding all the influences that have brought me to this point. So what issues do you guys feel as Latino males we are currently trying to work through, and where are we missing the mark, and where perhaps can we focus on to improve things for our Latino males.
Yeah, I think for that, I think it depends what generation of Latino man you have, right? I think that's very important, um, because the different worldview, right? Of a first generation just got here from Cuba, Guatemala, Salvador, Colombia, versus like a first generation from the U.S., right? I think that's where the identity comes, which we've all heard kind of that saying, "Ni de aquí ni de allá," right? And just kind of like I think that identity comes so in play in your masculinity because you're trying to find like what is masculinity? Is it what my dad is doing, or if you didn't have a dad, a stepdad, or a tío, like is this what it looks like to be a man, or should I base it off on what my friends are saying that what a man looks like or wants to be, right? And it gets kind of messy, right? Because not only are you trying to figure out your identity as a person in this country or in this place or in this and not only for your skin color and the way you speak or the foods that you eat, but you're also trying to say like how should I interact with the other communities if you have if there's diverse communities in where you're at. And so I think the second generation, third generation is kind of asking a lot of those questions, and then I think it ultimately goes back to like it holds both of those at the same time, and I think they get very confused. So I work with a lot of the teenagers, especially they're in the juvenile like system, and to me that's really hard. But they show this toughness, and I think they are attracted to other tough men, because they want to be that tough man. But when they actually get to talk to me, they're actually very tender, and they actually are they care a lot about their mom and then about their family members and about like the betterness of their community, even though they're like either smoking weed or like skipping school or whatever. Like they put this kind of front of toughness, but inside are very, very gentle and very, very caring and have a lot of trauma, which I've talked about in the past. And so I think that's where it gets mixed up. And I personally think that a lot of these boys that end up turning into men essentially are told, don't show emotion, don't express yourself, be tough, and then kind of follow with that line. And just once they notice they're 30, 40, right? And they want men friendship, right? Because even having male friendships is seen as not appropriately, right? It's like, it is, but it isn't. Like you can't be vulnerable and being like, I feel sad or I feel upset or my parents are struggling financially. I don't know how to feel about this situation, or my cousin got deported or whatever. Like I can't feel this type of emotions. And so I think that leads to a lot of complications, specifically in the Latino community. And then for me, I grew up with my dad is from El Salvador, and he was a military. So he was very about, you show no emotion, you're tough, like you'll overcome, you're a leader. Like every lunch, that was the thing that I heard every time, and I think that really kind of messed me up because I'm a very like expressive man, and I like to express how I feel. I feel things very deeply. Like I cry, and I especially when like social justice stuff, I just like cry every time something happens, and like I'm just very tender. But when I didn't have that specific mentorship at that particular time, like I would just choose my aggression and anger, and I still fall for it even now as a full-on mental health therapist, as an almost 30-year-old man. I still fall into the anger and bitterness, like feelings that I had when I was 12, 13.
Yeah, I'll just kind of jump in. Thank you, Miguel. I think you touched upon some really important factors there when we're talking about identity, and really who's teaching us, right? Where are we learning, this concept of what does it mean to be a man? And it's something that I think when I work with people, I reflect a lot on the macro level, right? I teach a lot of history. And sometimes, and it depends on people's worldview, right? When we talk about mental health, you have the Western mentality of mental health, and this is how you do therapy. And it's very it's like a vertical process, right? Step by step. And so for me, what I try to do is come from a cultural perspective, right? So in my process, I'm going to reflect a lot on history. I'm going to reflect, and when I say history, I'm not talking about just family history and identity. I'm talking about generational history, history that's happened through. We'll talk 500 years ago. You know, I'm Mexican, so I'm talking about what happened 500 years ago that has had an impact. What are some survival mechanisms that we've had to utilize in our process? When we talk about identity, we have cultural values that were original to the people that were living here in Mexico, Centro America. And what happened, 500 years ago, when we have the colonization of these countries, there was a disruption that has caused wrinkles throughout all these years. And so what happens is we've developed unhealthy coping mechanisms that have helped us to survive. And so when we begin to analyze, and there's it's like an art form of how you do these things, because I can't just kind of like go in and throw out all this historical facts because it's not a history class. But in order to understand, who I am, I need to reflect on what has happened throughout my life and what has happened throughout history, because we carry that historical trauma. And so within our identity, there are so many strengths, so many beautiful values that we have. And so it's really about kind of learning about that and having those conversations, right? So if nobody's having those conversations with me, and to touch upon what Miguel has mentioned, and people are teaching me these negative stereotypes, these negative myths about who I am, and we see it, in social media. We see it in the government and the policies. And so again, all these things, it's like a puzzle. We're putting a puzzle together, and there's all these pieces that come together. And so I throw out that question a lot, right, to the kids and the men and whoever I work with, that question of why. Why do you think this happened? And then they'll give me an answer, and I'll say, well, why did that happen? And why did that happen? And so we begin to reflect, and we begin to kind of see how all these factors have affected my identity and who I am today. And so it's very complex, right? It's a real complex discussion that doesn't just happen over one cup of coffee or within 6 months of therapy, right? We're not going to be able to answer that completely. In fact, it's going to take years to be able to get to that point. So, yeah, that's kind of, I guess, what comes to my mind when I think about that question of identity. Our identity is constantly forming, right, throughout our experiences that have happened in the past, and the experiences we feel in the present, and for the experiences that are yet to come. So, yeah, no, that's a really good question, RJ.
Yeah, and just to jump in too, like I think I love those conversations with the teenagers, especially for my I have Grand Island is very unique in its demographics, but we have a large Afro-Cuban community, but we also have a large indigenous Guatemalan community that speak their own language. And so when they're talking to me, I always reflect back, and I actually do the same thing. I always have a history session with them, maybe session 3, session 4. After my conversation about mass incarceration, I always bring that into the table, into therapy. And I think what I'm hearing from Chato, and I think I'm hearing that I do, is like, in some way or the other, we're removing that Western type of therapy and actually bringing some facts and bringing some history and bringing some of the macro level stuff, like, yo, these behaviors are not just because you're a quote unquote bad person. There's this larger scheme of why we got here. And I think Achata really hit that really, really good. But going back to the Afro-Cuban or indigenous Guatemalans that I get to see in teenagers and men, it's like I have to go back to history, right? From colonization to slavery to civil wars to imperialism, like all this information, right? Which is some big words, right? And kind of scary words. but I get to share to them about that, and it really starts to click on the kids. Eventually that leads into the conversation of mass incarceration, right? And I'm like, hey, actually, this is what's happening, and even bringing even some like actual facts right now. I'm like, hey, like Ricketts wants to buy a new prison. Like, this is the system we're working on, and like, you're a good kid. Like, this is, I want the goodness of you and stuff like that, and so just having even those conversations, I think. I don't think other therapists do that, and I think the benefit of Chato and I being one male Latino therapist in Nebraska is we really understand the implication that this affects to our, brown and black kids, especially because those are the kids that I predominantly work with the most, and they have this connection, right? This connection, this intellectual connection, that these pieces kind of come together because they themselves are extremely intelligent and they understand this, right? They may not have the wording or education, but a lot of our community understands these systems, and I think it's important to name those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just processing all those things. I don't know, Chato, if you have a question for us.
And there's a terminology within our therapy process here in the United States. One of the questions that they'll ask in a biopsychosocial assessment, right, the basic thing that you're doing to start out, one of the questions that they ask is acculturation, right? And so what I've begun to do, right, and this has taken time and years, right, since the moment I started to kind of reconnect to who I am and my identity, when I was 23 years old, living in San Jose, California, going to the Mexican American Community Service Agency and connecting to men. That not only did they talk a certain talk, but they walked their talk. And that was something that was very foreign to me, right? These were men that were saying that you respect women. These were men that were saying we don't do drugs and we don't consume alcohol. This was a different shift, right? So these were men that were nonviolent. These were men that were from they were from the barrio. And these were men that were talking about being connected emotionally, spiritually. And so, that was kind of the beginning of my process of kind of just unlearning a lot of things that I had been taught and told throughout my life. So there's a terminology that comes into play when we think about this question that says acculturation. And so I kind of have been doing this for a while, but it was brought up to me in conversation that they said a lot of people will talk about decolonization. So letting go of Western mentality, but there's a word that I think that's really more important for us as a community, as raza, and that's the deacculturation, right? Deacculturation. That's the first step, because when we begin to acculturate, we start to let go of those very beautiful things that we have inside of our culture, right? And so we have a lot of kids that are confused, not even just kids, but adults that are professionals, and they're confused and they don't know who they are and their identity. And then they start to, engage in these activities that are not truly who they are, right? That they aren't their true essence of what it means to be a person from Mexico, a person from El Salvador, a person from Guatemala, because there's a true essence to that. And so I think that is a question that I throw out to people, is to deacculturate, right? Deacculturate, de-assimilate, because within us and what we have, it's our greatest strength. And so this is something that over the years and working with kids and families and different systems, the social welfare system, from working in a community-based agency to working in the mental health, the corporate nonprofits, and just seeing what happens, what's the consequence when kids acculturate, when people and adults acculturate, when they assimilate, and how that has an impact on mental wellness, on mental well-being, right? So it's heavy. These are heavy conversations. These are in-depth conversations. These are conversations that are not being held, but they're so important, right? So important. So yeah, that's what comes to my mind, as I'm kind of hearing and reflecting the direction that we're kind of going. So yeah.
Guys, I'm just processing all these thoughts, and what I'm thinking about is, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of pain, not exclusively in the Latino community, but as you both have referenced, just the journeys of who we are and shaping our identities. One of the things that I'm trying to think through and learn through is just kind of how, as males, we view and we treat women. We have like our mamas or our sisters and loved ones in the families, but also, and again, this is, for maybe like a potential girlfriend or potential, wife one day, and just seeing and even having in the past committed some disrespect, some very negative, toxic behaviors. I don't know, guys. I mean, any thoughts on what Latino males can do to help heal some of those traumas or pains, to maybe not be giving so many negative, toxic behaviors? Not all, but it is present, in the communities.
Miguel, I love to hear your perspective. I'm gonna throw something out just to add on to what RJ was saying. For example, there was recently a lot of buzz that happened because of the cancellation of Pepe Le Pew from Warner Brothers Space Jam 2. I don't know if you were familiar with all that, Miguel.
No, I must have missed that one.
So Pepe Le Pew, right? He's the skunk, right, from Looney Tunes.
Okay. Yeah.
And he was always constantly going after, I think it was a female cat, in love, and constantly trying to kiss and hug and doing all these things. And so recently what happened was that there was a cancellation. He wasn't allowed to be in Space Jam 2. Warner Brothers decided that he promoted rape culture, for example. And so it caused a lot of buzz, and there was a lot of stir all over, well, at least all over social media on my Facebook. There was a lot of passionate people that were mad, right? And so we had a lot of mujeres that were, stepping up and sharing their perspectives and saying, kind of their ideology was that this is promoting rape culture, and this is, it's not just about a cartoon. But just within that, even that little post, there was that idea of all these men that had this perspective of, it's just a cartoon, and people need to stop being so sensitive and XYZ. So just kind of throwing that in there too, Miguel, as you think about RJ's question.
Yeah. So right away, first recommended to everybody is read Bell Hooks, right? Bell Hooks is her book about all about love, and then masculinity are very important, because the argument that she does is that we want to love, but we don't know how, so we choose these avenues of abuse, and this affects heavily women, right? With sexual abuse and domestic violence and all that, right? But it affects us as well as men, because we continue to promote that circular thing. So I think I always see it at again, macro level, thinking about why have we got there? Where did this start? And it goes back to history, right? Where has this where did that kind of thinking, and I think it's specifically in the Latino community, how did masculinity and machismo become a thing, right? And Chato alluded to this a couple of minutes ago, but this was a lot about survival, right? About like the toughness, about like I need to do this so then I am not enslaved, or I'm not sold, or I'm not murdered, right? And if you had a civil war, if you had anything else, you had to operate in this like tough role. But and then if they do the path to crossing the border, right, on top of that, you have all that stuff. So then we're here, right? We have this generation, and we're not in this survival mode, but we're still kind of like up in arms, ready to go. And I think that does a lot of damage because they're not in survival mode anymore, and they haven't learned to adjust. Of course, the U.S. has a lot of issues, and there's a lot of things, right, that we're not talking about. But so I think it kind of when I put the pieces together, that's kind of what I consider. But then we continue that machista culture, right? Like no llores, no, you're a man, and we kind of start believing that we have all full authority, right? And I'm guilty of that too. Or like when I go at home, I let my mom serve me, right? But that I know that seems small, and I know she's doing it out of love, but sometimes like it can be pretty abusive if every time I go, she has to serve me, right? It's just like, so that's why I always try to pick up the plates and always try to ask where she needs for help and stuff. But even small things like that can build up to kind of these larger kind of like thinking that women are like a possession and that you can do that, which I think that's where I think the whole cancellation of for Space Jam, because I think sometimes us men start believing that lie, like, oh yeah, you want me or you desire me, and that's not really true, right? And I think the community, specifically women and the LGBT community and the black women particularly, are like, nah, like we're not gonna allow this, right? Consent and all the other stuff, and that's really important. And I think us men are adapting to one cancellation, which is important because I personally think it's a boundary. We're not going to cross that boundary, right? And that's really important because we often don't have boundaries. And then two, it's like they've always had to voice the inappropriateness, and we kind of as men kind of like don't respect that, and we need to just take a step back, right? Just like on the race conversation, if that other person is being marginalized, you have to sit down, step, and just listen. You can't get defensive, and can't put your point of view because then it's not constructive. So I'll put a pause on that. Let Chato go, or RJ.
Yeah, and it's been an interesting topic that has come up, and it's so when we look at our culture, and we're talking about hundreds of years, there's always been a respect for the matriarchy, right? There's las mujeres, right? The women are the heart of a family. Even in spirituality, right? In spirituality, and not to get it.
Did we lose you,
Too
Chato?
deep, but again, it's virgen. And
there it is.
That there's that connection to the fin, and where does that come from? Even before the Catholic Church, there was into Earth, and Earth was viewed as feminine, Mother Earth, and so in Mexico they would refer to it as Onancing, and so when the Spanish came, they began to really murder people. They took their spirituality away and tried to convert them to Catholicism. And so when we reflect back, there's...
Oops. Oh no, the signal must have dropped. Hey, Chato?
Yes.
Oh, yep. Looks like you got kind of broken up there for a second, but now you're back and we can hear you clearly. Feel free to continue on it with, I think it was the Conquista that you were referring to.
Yeah, and we're talking about looking at history and culture, and there's a connection to the feminine. So even looking at like within, I'll use Mexico for example, because that's where my family comes from. the Virgin Mary, right? It's Catholicism, the Virgin Mary, the Mother, and but if we begin to look beyond that, before that, the people, the indigenous people that lived there, right? They were connected to the earth, and for them, the earth was feminine, and so there was a lot of reverence, to that piece, and so the conversion, and the conversion was killing, murder, death. People couldn't have their own spiritual beliefs, and they were converted to Catholicism. So then, what happens is that they begin to hide their spirituality behind some of these Catholic symbols. And so, this is a prime example, right? If we look at Catholicism across the world, there's not a high reverence to the Virgin Mary like there is in Mexico, and that's because of the hidden symbolism behind it. So, why do I share this? Is because of that connection to the feminine, right? Throughout our history, the feminine were the heart, the most important, and so, what's happened over years is that, again, history has caused some maladaptive coping skills, some maladaptive behaviors, trauma. And so we begin to lose our identity and who we are, right? And so then we begin to engage in these behaviors, such as violence, such as substance use, to survive, as a survival mechanism. And so what happens, though, and I think this is really important, is that we begin to have that awareness. Once we have that awareness and understanding that, hey, this isn't truly a part of my identity, this isn't truly who I am, we begin to be the example for other men, right? And so myself, choosing the profession that I've chosen, I have to live what I preach. I live it every single day of my life. So you're not going to find me drunk. You're not going to find me high. You're not going to find me out there abusing women. And I'm going to be that example, which is critical. And so when we begin to have healthy individuals, we'll begin to have healthy families. When we have healthy families, we have healthy communities. So we begin to have this self-awareness, right? And we begin to answer these questions, why? And the one thing that I'll say to men, we have to shut up and listen.
Oh, did we lose you, Chato?
Something.
There we go. So you kind of broke up when you said the one thing we have to do.
Yeah.
We'll give you, yeah.
And we have to listen. To women, we're not being. We can't tell a woman to feel a certain way, to get over it, to minimize. Those are the two things that I see that happen the most. There's minimization. We minimize things, then people would disassociate, right? So they disconnect. Well, as men, we need to shut up and listen, right? When women are sharing and talking about their experiences, especially related to trauma, as men, you take a step back and you listen, right? We don't try to tell them. We don't try to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
I think you cut again.
There you go. You kind of cut out there for a second, Chato.
So I'll finish on that, right? That as men, we have to sit back and listen, right? We don't take that role of telling women how to deal with their trauma, because we're not women. So yeah. I'll leave it at that.
And to jump there too, like if they feel unsafe or they feel like, hey, this person is texting me weird, like you have to accept that. You have to say like yes, or in the streets of like, hey, this guy was staring at me, or it's a bar or whatever. Like I just felt really uncomfortable. Like that's your key to be there for them, right? Not to be like, no, he wasn't. That guy wasn't really doing anything. Like, oh, relax, don't, you're taking it too seriously. Like, no, like this is like dangerous for them. I think there's a thing on social media that goes like, why does women know so many people that have been sexually abused, but men don't know any rapists, right? and that's a true reality, because us men choose not to look to that. And so when a woman feels unsafe, and specifically if they're a woman of color, because then you add the race component, and we haven't talked about intersectionality, but then you add a different dynamic as well, and you must listen and you must shut up, listen, shut up, be there for them, because this is some really implications of their safety. So adding that, and then adding the other thing too, is that going back to the history part, is also us people of color, predominantly Latino communities, and that's kind of the target that we're talking about, is we're a collective community, and we're collective, and we see that, right, with the carne asadas and the quinces and the dances and all that stuff. We're very collective. But since we've come to the U.S., and specifically we're talking about this generation, again, the whole acculturation that Chato was saying was like, we want to be individual, but our like bodies is asking us to be communal. So there's this like constant battle, and it's like we're communal. So as men, we need to be in community to heal in community. But what we're taught is like, no, like you just like, if you're struggling, like figure it out on your own, and you can't really share that. And then if you add the kind of the basis of Christianity, right, it's just like it's all about your sin, but we see sin as an individual problem, not really as a collective problem. And so I also I work for a university. I'm also a campus minister. I've been doing this for 5 years, so I have a little bit of a spiritual experience of leading others. But we also individual sin versus collective sin, and so I think that's also like even the way that machismo kind of plays into the Catholic and the Protestant church. I grew up in a predominantly more Protestant church, and Pentecostal to be more exact, and so it becomes very toxic, right? And so we learn the toxicity because we also believe that God is like machista, or he's like a jefe, right? But he's not. He's very loving and caring and tender, right? Even the way that if you read like the Gospels of Jesus, like he was very kind and very warm, and so even the way that we even see that, I think it portrays specifically in our cultural the way that we kind of act. So that's all I have.
One thing that came up in my mind too when you referenced the intersectionality and race, is that especially in media and maybe in modern media, it's the media is a little more focused on avoiding this, but at least historically in media, you would often see perhaps a white female being, pursued by some sort of aggressive or predatory brown or black male. Yet we never see images of a black or brown female being pursued by an aggressive, antagonistic white male. Okay, so things that come up in my mind and things I've been learning about are topics like missing and murdered Indigenous women and people, right? What atrocities that are happening at the border, where females are taken advantage of as they're making their journey, and it's just a very painful topic. And I just want to throw that out there to the discussion and just say, like, in the messaging and the conditioning that the overall general society receives, why are we not talking about these atrocities that are happening, especially for the black and brown, females?
Afraid, because these are complex conversations, I think. Again, we're choosing to be individual versus communal, or being like, hey, we messed up, we need to work things out, right? I think pride kicks in. I think we just had the summit, and I think Chato said this, or I don't know, I think it was you, but I feel like even in the Latino community, we have this like crab mentality that once you're out, and you don't want to help everybody else. Like, instead of like us getting out of the bucket together, like we go back to individuals and greed, and we don't help each other or help our community. And we see that so much, and I think that's been a frustration even for a younger generation. They're very selfish, and I think all generations are selfish, but like we start seeing like, oh, like you can really make a difference, and you're not, right? We're choosing. I think even right now with the people that are not taking COVID seriously, that are going out, I'm like, you're gonna risk your life for going out in Lincoln and Omaha. Like, yo, like that's embarrassing, you know. So it's just like, if that's your personality and that's all the money, which again, money is very important, right? If you're not putting your money into resources to benefit of the community, right? And then you're just spending it on $100 to $200 to go out every weekend, right? Those $100 to $200 can really make a difference in our community. And I think we, in some way, are just very selfish, because we ourselves have our pain, so we cope on these kind of ways. And I think I'm guilty of that, you know, in the past and stuff like that. And so I just kind of took this into a different road, but basically saying that we're very selfish, and if we chose to take a step back, see the betterment of our community, we could actually start having these conversations. But instead, we're not. We're choosing our own thing, which again could also lead to, you know, some traumatic responses, right? Of why we do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'll touch upon something that Miguel mentioned earlier. So within our communities, within our culture, we're collectivist, right? Like a circle. And that's our greatest strength. But when there are pieces that are, I guess we could say, rotten, it can be our greatest weakness. We will succeed together. We will triumph together as one, but we will also suffer together, right? We'll suffer together. We'll fail together. I think that, and this is all interconnected, and this is the interesting thing, right? When we talk about mental wellness, mental health, and we're talking about identity, all these things are interconnected, and it's not just one thing. And this is the difference between Western mentality of mental health, right? We're looking at the very micro level. There's a symptom, and we're going to fix the symptom, right? There's a behavior, there's a symptom, and we're going to come in and teach you a skill so that we can, reduce that symptom. We can change it. But the reality is, when we're talking about people I'll say indigenous people, right? Because that's who we are. We're indigenous people from Mexico, from Central America, South America. That's who we are. So when we're looking at our people, we never had mental health, right? The people that I work with, there's no mental health therapists in Mexico. The people that have money are the ones that are going to mental health therapy, right? So I want to challenge Miguel a little bit, because I've heard him say this word a few times, right? And he says that we're very selfish, right? But I feel like we're not, man. That's not. We're the complete opposite, right? In our families, we take our shirts off our backs. We feed people. You come in, I don't have anything, but I'm going to feed you. I'm going to take care of you. My mom would call all the kids mijo. They weren't her children, but she would call them mijo, my son, my daughter, right? There's these core values that we carry. And what happens when we're talking about this idea of why don't we talk about the women, because the women, they suffer the most. And the problem is because we've gone away from these core values, right? Again, this idea of acculturation, assimilation, we're talking about trauma. And then we have these maladaptive coping skills that have happened after generation to generation. And so we begin to lose this concept and idea of what does it mean to be a man? And so, yeah, it's in depth, it's intense. And so then that's where we come in, right? That's why we have these conversations that we're doing today. That's why every day when I work with the young boys, we have these conversations. That's why I have to live what I'm preaching. That's why when I see something that ain't right, I have to jump in and speak up, because we have a heavy role to play, and it's very heavy on our shoulders, because it's beyond just being, I carry my family, I carry Mexico, I carry Guanajuato, I carry South Omaha, I carry mental health, I carry all these things, right? And it's heavy. It's a heavy burden to carry, but nobody, one of my leaders, spiritual leaders, always says this: no one told you to choose this path, right? No one forced you to walk this path, but you chose to walk it. And so what we're doing is we're planting these seeds, right? And hopefully, like, we'll go back to that idea of healthy individuals create healthy families. And when we have healthy families, we'll have healthy communities. And so that's what we're doing. We're trying to help, And so there's a lot of healing, right? I'm in my own healing process, and it's taking a lot of time, right? I've started years ago when I was 23. I'll say that's when I really began to start that healing process of reflecting and identity and wanting to see, well, what kind of man do I want to be? So yeah, you ask that question, right? And it's complex, right? Very complex. And then we look at society, right? Society is not going to make a big deal out of it. Plain and simple. There's white supremacy, within our government, within our policies. We're down here, and white supremacy is up here, right? And it's a fact. It's a reality. When we look at our institutions, who's at the top? Who is being a director? Who is being a manager? It's not people of color. In California, barely you would see, depending on the agency, you might see a brown executive director. And if at that, a lot of times, it's males above women. So we begin to kind of look at that. So yeah, man, it's a deep question, and it's a question that makes me angry, right? I get frustrated, and I felt it, and I say, well, yeah, I'm angry. Why aren't you angry? That's the question. Is why aren't you angry, and why aren't you doing anything about it? And so we have to begin to challenge each other. We have to challenge our communities. We have to challenge our leaders, right? That has to be done. So yeah, I could go on and on about this, man, because I get riled up. But it's big.
Good.
It's bigger than just well, how come nobody talks about it? Well, we've got a lot of families that this collective is falling apart. So we're not going to be looking out for each other like we should, because this has started to fall apart, because our minds have begun to get rotten, and some people have become selfish, and they get this Western mentality and start to, individualize. So this falls apart, and that has a effect on all community. So it's deep, man. It's real deep, and a lot of people aren't wanting to look at it. I challenge people almost every freaking day, man, and I get tired. But I know that I have to recharge, and I have to keep doing it, and I have to keep having these conversations and throwing in conversations that, man, I shouldn't be having, but I have to, because if I don't do it, then who is, right? And so I'm very happy that we're having this conversation today. It's really good. So yeah.
And just to jump real quick, yeah, and I think white supremacy really is why this collective is kind of like parting, and that's what I mainly more meant about the selfishness, is because we choose our proximity to whiteness because it gives us benefits, right? To the oppression of the Black community. That's the reality, right? As Latina people, right? We can be ambiguous, right? We can just like not talk, and then like they might think we're the gardener, and like we're cool, but the Black community cannot do that, right? They're Black and they'll be oppressed, right? My partner is Black, and so I've had to learn the privilege that I have as a Latino person, right? And how anti-Black stuff that we do, right? And so I think like our proximity to whiteness, if we don't reject it, like we become that individual selfish. But if we stay true to our native blood and Black blood that we do also have, if you're from certain areas of Latin America, it brings us back to collectiveness, right? And it brings us back to healing, and it brings us back to the importance of women, right? Because those two cultures always had importance of, Native women, Indigenous women, and Black women as the center and as someone that you protect and care. But when we allow ourselves to be closer to whiteness or proximity to white supremacy, we start to act and do the things that they do, right? And that's where we can be doomed, right? And that's more complex on the white supremacy and all that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And the only thing I would add to that, is just kind of how the market incentivizes people to pursue a pathway that is heavily rooted in wealth accumulation. You get paid if you're in the financial industry, if you become a lawyer, and not necessarily always the educational upbringing that might expose you to an ethnic studies or a women's studies, to learn these different things, history classes that may present a different side of history other than the Western colonial viewpoint. So, I mean, just going forward, my concern is also just that we as an economy prioritize the money-making industries and professions, and not so much the teachers and others who are helping the nonprofits. Those who work in the communities don't receive that same financial incentive, that the moneymakers do. So just throwing that on there too.
Yeah, I mean, even just to like make it like current, like 10% or what, 20% losses of the global economy because of the canal, of that one that's blocked.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
capitalism in itself is very fragile, and one small thing and everything breaks down. So that kind of tells you that this system is not really well designed, right? If every 5-10 years we have to like save it.
And who?
Yeah, RJ, again, you're throwing out very important things. Like for people who are listening, mental wellness for us goes beyond, again, that very specific symptomology, and we're looking to fix this symptom. You're depressed, let's fix it. No, it goes beyond that. It's deeper than that, man. We're talking about hundreds of years. We're talking about capitalism. How does capitalism affect my mental health? My dad has been working in the meatpacking plants for 40 fucking years, not had one paid sick day, right? Ready to retire, not one paid sick day. And so we begin to ask, well, how does that affect health, mental health, right? And so, yeah, man, this stuff it's a beast of what we're facing, right? And so, again, and this will always be my message, right? Constantly, and I'll throw it out till the day I'm 90 years old, still doing it. That we have to be that example, right? If you're going to choose to walk this path of helping and healing, then you have to live what you talk about. You have to. They told me when I was 23, I was brand new, wanted to save the world. I had just left Washington, D.C., working on Capitol Hill, thinking that I was, again, that Western mentality of being at the top. When I came into this agency, they didn't care about my resume. They didn't care about my suit or tie. They were like, what, Ant? They cared about my character. Who was I? How did I walk my path? Did I have honor? Did I have respect? Did I have dignity? How would I treat families? How would I treat kids? Right. And so those are things that were taught in our culture, man. I learned this from my parents. These are, and our families are not perfect, but we have these values that have been passed down from generation to generation, that despite all these challenges that have happened, right? And my Auntie Renee has said this, right? That we have been able to persevere, right? Despite all these things throughout history, as our people, we've persevered, right? Not that we have, I forget. I'm so good that I forgot. I've been trying to delete that other word that means
resilience.
Yeah, there you go. I'm good. I was like, I got rid of that word, so that's why I couldn't remember it, right? So it goes beyond resiliency, right? It's not about resiliency. Resiliency doesn't take into account everything else. It kind of just puts it on the person. But as a collective, we have persevered, right? And the things that have helped us to persevere are these values that we've carried from generation to generation. So again, whether it's within your spirituality, whether it's within your work, there are core values that we have to keep. Respecting women, right? Not abusing drugs, having respect, having dignity, having honor. Those are things that are going to help us to heal as a collective. Because I see a lot of the opposite. People that are trying to, find their path, but then they're still haven't let go of some of these negative coping mechanisms that have happened due to trauma. And so when we do that, it's like if you're bringing something rotten and you're placing it in with something that's not rotten, and then it's going to like infect, right? And it's going to spread. And so, we have to be mindful of that. And so, but yeah, man, that's my thing that I'll say and I'll throw out is that you have to walk what you preach. You have to, because people are watching. And the moment that we don't walk what we preach, has an impact. And from lived experience as a kid and seeing it, what happens when people don't walk what they preach. So yeah, it's intense, man. It's intense, and there's layers and layers and layers to this. And but like I said, I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, and for like the people that are watching and listening, like our goal is like it's not for us to like show off all the knowledge that we have, but more that there is that us people group have knowledge and we should share it, and that we need to have these conversations, and it starts with vulnerability, and it starts with like, I don't know, I need help, I need, and I think for me that's what it was. Like, I don't understand this concept, I need help, or I need to be vulnerable when I'm tripping, or when I'm not doing so well, in terms of treating women, or in terms of like even treating people in general, right? It takes accountability, and that's the beautiful part of the collective community that we have, because we can call ourselves, obviously in an honoring and a caring way. That's how it should be, but that's what makes us better. And if we can do that, then our communities, that ripple effect that Cheto said, I personally believe a lot, right? I believe that if an individual is healed, they're going to bring healing to their family. That family is going to bring healing to their community. That community is going to be able to bring healing to other communities, right? And we see that ripple effect of the benefits of healing. So it starts with choosing healing for yourself, because if you choose healing for yourself, which is long, it can be expensive, right? And all that stuff, but choose healing for yourself, because it really is going to make a difference, not only for your family and your community, but generations after you. And that's a beautiful thing.
Okay, guys. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, so I want to thank you both, and I'm really thinking and processing and feeling a lot of what's been said. So I just want to end on that note, and I want to give each of you a moment to share any final thoughts. But from a personal perspective, this is a conversation we need to have many times more. And, as somebody who is fairly new to this topic, fairly new to the world of exploring my own feelings and traumas, I invite any of the listeners or viewers, if you need to talk on anything, to at least where to get started. I'm not a professional, so I'm not going to offer any of that, but I can at least connect you to somebody, like such as these two gentlemen or whatever, that will be best for you. So thank you both very much. And I want to turn it over to Chato, and then we'll give Miguel the final word.
Yeah, thank you both, Miguel, for all the work that you're doing in Grand Island. I know you're making a huge impact out there, and there's going to be ripple effects. Just even like you said, it hasn't been what you said, like a year that you've been doing it out there.
Yeah.
So even with the most critical year, right, to be able to do that. So, I saw Miguel on a panel, and I loved what he said, and I could relate to a lot of the things he said. So I was really excited to invite him on and have this conversation with him. And that's what it takes, right? It takes us to begin. I kind of spoke a lot already, but just being those examples, to be the example, and patience, man. We're planting seeds, and sometimes, guess what? We're not going to see the end result of what we've planted. Sometimes that's going to happen generations down the line, but within this generation, it seems like we begin to wake up, and we're noticing, hey, that this has been unhealthy, and we're going to stop this, right? And that's what we're trying to teach, is to stop these unhealthy coping skills that have helped us to survive to this point, to survive not in the best and healthiest way, but they've gotten us to this point. But we know that we can't continue using them, and so we're cutting them, and we're planting new seeds. So just want to thank both of you for this opportunity to come in, and man, I could talk for hours upon hours about this stuff. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work to do. And hopefully, we can motivate the next generation of therapists and counselors. And here's a fact. I'll end with this note. The reality is this: not everyone is going to go and get a master's degree and become a therapist, because it's difficult. It takes time. You have to go to school, and it costs money. But the reality is this: I can only work with so many people. So for me, when I look at it and I look at the interventionist, there's a lot of people that work in intervention work, and that maybe they're not a therapist, but they provide therapeutic work and they can help so many people, probably even beyond what I can do as a therapist, right? So whether you're a teacher, whether you're an interventionist, whether you work at a Boys and Girls Club, whether you work, at a Latino Center of the Midlands doing truancy work, whether you work at Vision or Education Quest, right? It doesn't matter. If you're interacting with people, you have that ability to have a positive impact on a person's life. So just to keep that in mind, right? That our daily interactions can also have a ripple effect on people's lives. So, Miguel, thank you again for being on with us today. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Chato. Yo, you are pretty cool, man. Both of you guys, like I said, I've been following you guys on social media for a minute, and just seeing some of the work that you guys have been doing, specifically with the meatpacking workers. And first, I just want to thank and honor your work, and for advocating for our community and the community of marginalized communities, right? I think it's part of masculinity and all that is also being able to praise and thank and and demonstrate love to other men, right? And so I want to once say I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you for loving and caring for our community as deep as you do. And my hope is that other men see this and other men are inspired to bring that love to their community the way that you guys are demonstrating that, not only through just advocacy, but even on the day-to-day things. So thank you for that. Yeah, I think I'm a little bit of a nerd, so I love books and I love podcasts, and I love to work out. So my thing is keep reading, keep reading and learning. There's a lot of historical things. If we do not know our history, we do not know how we're oppressed. And we don't know how we're oppressed, we keep operating in the system. And if we can heal and learn from our history, we can really make the difference in our own community. So the book that I always recommend is Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. It's a very important book to understand why Latin America is Latin America. Because again, it's not there. There's no why are they poor? It's they were underdeveloped and they were colonized and exploited, right? And we don't know this history, right? And if we don't know that history, we don't know why we ended up in the U.S. and why we're struggling here and why we're being oppressed here, right? So read Open Veins of Latin America. I mentioned Bell Hooks. She's an incredible author on all about love. I think it shows us how to be vulnerable and how to loving people because we don't know how to love well. And then she has a book called The Will to Change: Men, Masculinity, and Love. Very monumental in my life. The moments that I needed to do some healing. So check those books out. Latinx Therapy. There's a podcast out there. They have some really good stuff. Just random things. So if you're early in your stages of therapy, it's therapists from all across the U.S. Some really good stuff and really resources and stuff. And social media. Continue to follow influencers that like have good content and that you get to learn. Right. There's a lot of good therapists that have TikToks and Instagram accounts that are pretty legit. So follow some good people out there. So yeah, that's about that. And then, like I said earlier, find healing. Continue to fight for your healing because that healing for yourself is going to create that ripple effect for our communities. I believe that our community has lots of wisdom to share, and so continue to do that. And yeah, keep working on yourself, keep advocating for your community, and keep doing your self-care, which is, I know that sounds kind of basic and logistic, but we're not meant to work 8 to 5. That wasn't the plan. That wasn't the original human design, right? Take those breaks, right? Sleep, rest, drink water, go out in nature, go out on a bike ride, go on a walk, right? We're meant to be in nature. We're meant to be out in the ground, right? And remember that, right? Sometimes putting a pause on social media and putting a pause on kind of the networks and all that stuff. Like, go outside, enjoy the nature and the creation.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Miguel, Brother Chato. Always a pleasure. We'll end it right here, and we look forward to another conversation sometime in the future. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Adios.